Hello, America. We have to learn about slavery right. And so that requires uses of how the breaching method used color, force with the law, and against every single person, and where and how they replaced words our founders left us to teach for themselves, and other countries' founders words to teach they for themselves that they had replaced and that we had replaced, and where now that had been self-valued by our own and their own there. We're in a semi-ancient trap that used way more than that remotely, being and having been sustained. As one breaching method's use of all locations everywhere the species identity of volume is. Now, tactical terrier. Some guys, some kids say when I used to was boxing. I still am going to be boxing, God willing. My eye turns gray when I fight. Boxing is my. I don't know if that was really happening, but in other words, slavery, black and white. There are short words and hyper evidential revelations where and how people make uses of black and white and slash white. For example, uses of where and how everyone was native. It was native once. There are proofs that then the sciences in semi-ancient times became criminally foreign influence, and they had to react as fact treatment nature, not increasingly not knowing how to react properly, increasingly not realizing they were increasingly simultaneously self-valuing the sciences individually grouped and together abridged. They were increasingly self-valuing the real causes of increasingly insidiousness, natures of database relationships, and value to the significance of increasingly simultaneously manifest impositions of natures relevant to where and how we make positive and negative treatments and slash identity treatment, sequence value treatment. So when they pretend people agree to disagree, those arrays are still being and having been employed. Arrays of opinion natures and fake middle, fake sides, physical delusions, making them as real sides because they need to keep the array. In other words, to keep out finite truths that show the lies of A through Z regarding American history has not been told, has not been formally defended yet. Let's not forget. More than the North and South were dictated by our founders' plan to fight against slavery sickly distinctly, because they were sickly distinctly forced roles with it. The North wasn't against slavery; it's still involved with slavery. If having self-valuing, the breaching method, having employed countries A through Z individually grouped them together, roles with physical delusions, for example, simultaneously criminally foreign influence premises treatment tied to database relationships since before computers, and that having been and being left out when they evaluate um, the value of people's words, which they're calling opinions and which they're calling convictions, dishonestly, as identity theft, fraud, slander rules. One of the ways they got away with this and get away with it is because of how they have the campuses of each age and nature connected, and having been connected, where and how the method knew that fake integrity as the only sophistication slash non-sophistication as the opinion natures of Native Americans A through Z colonists A through Z, all against themselves. Native Americans against Native Americans, colonists against colonists, and then together, everyone's still. Our founders had to hide their roles, counter extorting the other founders. So we could use what is hyper evidential, which works better than a calculator. Calculators mimic how this works, that which is simultaneous. slash sequential slash simultaneous as itself, as your body, for example, is a demonstration of this. The distinct sequence natures of the parts of your body are simultaneously a semi-nature slash semi-nature, an increasing identity of volume and visible but still discernible, not just as time, not just as value, as identity through these systems, locations, voices. The ground was tactically abridged below the sophistication and greater than sophistication. Forced, tricked, hurt, pretended by everyone, by the laws that were sustained, had been sustained, even against those countries that were entrenched here as colonies from using them from abroad. See, the method had already used them from abroad and from what was already fluent through countries that were taking over, more replacing where and how we are actually naturally bound, individual, grouped, and species, and where and how that is functional to all kinds of answers, and as the answer slash S of the identity of volume that is hyper simultaneous. We don't have to agree on the name of it, but where and how groups agree on the name of it. We have to agree on that. We have to agree or not with the group, relevant to the relevance and to the increasing relativity of an as the hyper simultaneous as a scientific value, again inseparable from all question slash S regarding the law, for example, that which is actually recorded in the furtherance of self-valued roles being and having been used remotely, blaming the real causes of why and how there were and are qualities of fact-cheating nature, uses of where and how black slash white slash culture identity is formally treated, where there are formal opinions and convictions originally instilled that can't defend themselves and afford short words, and with the correlation nature at each age of fact-cheating nature actually is capable of understanding and simultaneously explaining. So they're lying about the capabilities of the understanding of kids relevant to a method slash S that knew that everyone would have to self-value being and having been blamed to other causes, others, or ourselves, and real causes of it. They made education like kids, like there's a sophistication that adults have that kids don't have. It's not there. Let's all prepare. If you follow mandate here, they do, in other words. So there are, in other words, there was a wedding of Chris Walters, who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with some men and women involved with child abuses against him and against a whole bunch of other kids, fabricating police reports, calling in police things to, in other words, remote uses of the courts, the Britain Superior Court, Hartford courts, Middletown courts, forensics locations, uses of these places remotely, where everyone speaks to others from formal locations. In other words, self-valuing roles where and how, originally and still. FBI, for example, its leadership and the equivalent at the times or any time when anyone opens their mouth about I've ever heard regarding color, shock and awe. Yeah, I've only heard. In other words, not addressing, not a nature capable of addressing the criminal insidiousness treatments that are surrounding uses and as uses of black and white as and slash white. So we were supposed to understand the pain of the victim predator roles, that the enslaved identities, to be part of it, the countries were involved with that, and how they represent culture, that is culture, leaving out that criminal insidiousness that is amended too, and semi as each of these definitions of culture simultaneously, where and how that has been applied to where and how each has lied in place of what is actually recorded, and where the identity theft, fraud, slander method is against everyone. So I learned this from there's a this is where any suburban kid, I want every, in other words, everyone to work in this in a movie, in a method of nature acting, even plays, even boxing stays. In other words, New York City is or any city in America. Just start. New York is just, you know the boroughs what goes with it, but the pamphleteers could start in any city first. Whoever claims it first, we have to start practicing before we are real. In other words, and we have to use. In other words, we have to organize the new industries right there, standing with other ones. For example, hyper journalism, which uses what is really true always, then not denying exceptions, exception nature, and it uses as evidence where and how mandated laws prevented offensively at all locations, in collusion with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, hundreds of countries, individually grouped and together. Those are negative things, but they're positive when we put them and honest about them, because it shows the breaching method that used all those motivations, they used everyone blaming other things, others, themselves, and delusions. And per how not realizing too, because they had replaced the short words, and they had a method by this, an identity theft slash fraud slash slander method that is made multi-front by nature itself, relative to the singular breaching method that just maintains everyone blaming other things, others, or selves for what that is, for the increasing denials of values in there, including identities. Because, in other words, of the identity slash IES of value slash value progression inherent to it as the value of the invisible but still discernible. For example, subjects treatment. They have this. This is inseparable from any treatments of war. This is where and how we could use just examination of how people make treatments by color, leaving out how the breaching method employed it, and how they've got away with that so long, when that was what our founders left us to speak for themselves, and where and how other was is pretended per roles as roles with that databases oriented breaching organized crime method to exploit the sense and sensibilities. For example, use Jane Austen's phrase of people A through Z, including people who like each other or not, all locations, roles with the identity theft, fraud, slander method against correlation nature. So it fit all kinds of identities of abridged sciences and law overtly slash insidiously roles and natures and needs and interests. Child abuse since you guys were kids, incapable of fathoming how there was a perfection by the law before law became criminally foreign influenced. And semi-ancient times before latter semi-ancient times, and in ancient times, where and how the ancients were shown to and knew how there is an identity of hyper simultaneous that is hyper invisible but still discernible, distinctly from how it is invisible but still discernible. I never took, I never studied the Chinese language, but I know they have a verb that is. I never read this either. I know they have a verb that is yin. They have a subject that is yang, and alpha and omega, and yin and yang, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, they are mother. Distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, they are father. And it's functional to and demonstration of distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously how there is one identity of volume that we are a semi-nature relationship to, as the cells of our body, as the cells and the organs of our body. Is the complete identity, semi-nature relationship to our complete identity. Not a doctor. So offensively, no one was paying attention to where and how the sciences got abridged, and nothing else is manifest at any locations. And people are speaking for sciences, leaving that out when they defend how they defend the sciences, which is names dropping and statements of people that are summaries. The theory of relativity is effectively used and maintained by our own, sickly distinctly from the breaching method rules, also through our own further, used to replace awareness of that which is hyper simultaneous with that which is relativity, simultaneously hyper relativity. It is so towards how we are individuals, towards how we are grouped, and towards how we are the species identity volume / S, distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously. How the cell nucleus, the cell body, and the cell wall / S are manifest as sequence / simultaneous natures. Those are two of the things they are simultaneously, constantly together, while being a shared identity further that we've named. I play no game to speak of color in this field. Yet worse than war and worse than revolution, stalled and never won. So war remained. So none have trained. Boxing. Boxing's martial arts, in wrestling, a fight but by the rules. And we can discuss them. And the phenomena to where and how all volume / S share the hypervolume that shares even the invisible subject and verb. Know how the verb's identity is distinct. It can be observed distinctly from where and how, in the form of when it's in a sentence, is relative to if it's being used as a main verb predicate or not. And note how simultaneously the predicate act is a phrase of the law. Note how also criminal foreign influences is a phrase of the law. That, see, the breaching method knew that modern countries A through Z, because first semi-ancient countries A through Z were forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, taken in shock and awe, and worse. Only remembering the sciences abridged, the short words abridged, revelations abridged, logic abridged, other pretended simultaneously. Other by nature force needed to be pretended by those standing for the identity of the Republic, no longer standing for the human science, no longer functional by its actual native function. The same way the human body is manifest, the Republic for which we stand, where and how ancients knew about criminal insidiousness distinctly from some ancients and distinctly from ourselves, and where and how better is where and how, a semi-ancient hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise, or that which we can counter as that syntactically, which is a more practical and more probable, more sane thing to counter, where and how syntactically countries A through Z have to have this relevant to their words, they have this relevant to their treatments of predicate acts and of the responses after they respond to things. You know, often always too late. And when they're trying to do things preemptively to stop them, they are still in the furtherance of it, originally still relevant to this. So there are increasing revelations inseparable from where and how we focus on how the breaching method employed color to be /s to be used syntactically by ourselves. That means ourselves. That means simultaneously, distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously. Overt criminal enterprises with locations juxtaposed, private ones with locations juxtaposed, database relationships with locations juxtaposed. Science is further with locations juxtaposed. Science is how grouped relative to the identity of relativity and what the breaching method knew it would demonstrate. In other words, we have the answers. Other is standing in place. We know that since before cars were invented, the suburbs were designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. And per a method that was replacing was creating means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures without anyone realizing as fake positive value. In other words, as systems and value treatments, tactical ulterior from those that are native pure and where true, capable of defending themselves as true, where the identity of relativity also demonstrates countries individually grouped and together, self-value being having been used remotely, individually grouped, used remotely too. And so how altogether locations, areas, and states stay criminally foreign influence. So the entire, everywhere the species body went, criminally foreign influenced identities of positive treatments / identity treatments / negative treatments, and simultaneously negative / identity / positive treatment. For example, where the sequence / simultaneous nature is traceable, so we can make um, um, a website that is what is it called, like cloud type for locations, and everything should feel like game /s, because deeper than the roads, and deeper than the obligations that they left untrenched, they left unfulfilled. The first primary obligation once we were declared a country, that the Declaration of Independence was declaring ourselves a country, in other words, an identity of law at all locations, areas, and states of itself, while it was still entrenched by the breaching method, sickly distinctly in the North and in the South, was slavery. But now it was with roles counter extorted to need to hide roles with our founders from that which seeks through countries individually grouped and together to hurt and maintain anyone who's going to break rules with the narratives at each location, area, and state, and then further inter-sciences, and then further collusion at locations, area, and state with those other juxtaposed motivations, natures, needs, interests, and narratives as sequence treatments and as ways we're dealing with what everyone only understood through life progressions when we're dealing with that which was sickly, distinctly hurting everyone to keep how sickly undiscerned, to keep the function, the method undiscerned. Method singular, which is reliant upon the methods, which are reliant upon keeping the real causes of negative value, nature, progressions, acts, natures, blamed on other things, others, ourselves, increasingly self-valuing that haven't been. And haven't been gotten away with it the way they were handed means to. Fact, treatment, nature oriented to rise. Arise. So there are various courts and their family members associated with a Joshua Stryker. I never had a conversation with my life. They tried to pretend other with people with Eric Oliveri. I remember the conversation I had with Eric Oliveri that night when I saw him in that thing about UPS and about his rules with and Eric Jensen and people on my street through time now involved further with predicate acts on off Trinity College and CCSU. That's in Hartford and New Britain, with people that time to also have confessions and uses of them on off my street. Whoever else with predicate acts or Wethersfield Police also with overt criminal enterprises, private ones. So this is positive because we can use and the exception nature tied to them, military and prisons tied to them, involved with identity theft, frauds, instances, and uses of corners and uses of tricks where they have arrests through time and people that do crimes, and then people have the crimes against them and collusion against innocent people too. Greetings, Earthly. Ryan Adams, how you doing, bud? So I forgot which we're speaking about. The revelations inherent to active and progressive, where people make treatments of white/black, or color treatments regarding, for example, where they leave out the breaching method, how it forced that here, where it forced that there. So I'm from Connecticut, and right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War that made America a country, George Washington was our first general, but he had to leave entrenched North and South slavery by a breaching method that was still entrenched, not by him. They had to hide their role, their actual roles and motivations with what led up to the revolution, because the breaching method would have sought them out. And they had to defend themselves syntactically, because it was countries individually grouped and together enslaved. And they're making value treatments anyway. They're making sciences connected opinion/convictions anyway. Identity convictions. So we have stayed in this trap. I don't know what that is. Ron Adams, what is that? The Collusion CDCs. I never heard of it. Did you mean collusion? Excuse me, collusion? Because there is collusion/S. There are all kinds of collusions relative to where and how. at each age of campus, each nature of campus, including fire campuses, EMS campuses, medical campuses. These are systems all tactically ulterior from their original unabridged form and function by that identity of hyper simultaneous on as the value of all locations as its system. What's really going to cause positive or negative value nature progressions, acts and natures, and where and how that is relevant to our syntax quality / IES. So when people make treatments, they record self-value criminally legalized uses of black and white by the law and as the law because they were differentially criminally foreign influenced though. And it was increasingly being used remotely through totally unrelated things, therefore related, but related through the organization of the hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise, therefore greater than and more finite than, while as the identity of value of sophistication, by in other words, equal to it of the archetypal criminal enterprises as countries A through Z, including how grouped. It was sophistication since semi-ancient times before that modern countries were sophistication forced to entertain alliances, for example, that it tricked, forced, hurt, persuaded, knowing that were the identities of other countries everywhere the species body volume was and is, it already was and is bound by the species system. Now, being a part of other systems and identities of, alliances and differences between countries through and as systems other than its own, increasingly it knew our syntax nature would self-value each age of campus, a pseudo sophistication relative to what each age is actually supposed to discern. So now one can learn. So the relevance and the relativity science is prevented offensively by people influenced, tricked, or persuaded to pretend as science is abridged. And as those only so having heard that, not to realize, and people don't really, the revelations here regarding nature as value / value as nature and where and how that is criminal insidiousness. When they make opinions about black and white and relative to what I'm trying to show with the little rap guy and friends, with their counter extortion, where the whole world is extorted and now counter extorted, and at all locations. And so they have roles with this at all locations. But I'm trying to show distinctly how the people of New York City in the building and in the ones next to them, sickly distinctly every individual of every building, and then how grouped as the human science. Two, how measured and maintained, self-valued by everyone as victim predator reactions, only fathoming how, two, because this is a vertical and horizontal databases oriented method /S. But that was, and those are bound, distinct natures of abuses of each age of fact treatment nature, including organized crime against each methods against each age of fact treatment nature, including ones that are completely recorded but uncharged, including for uses of identities, abridged, and in other words, having been manifest, where everyone forces everyone to speak through other people. That is relative. It's an identity theft / fraud / slander method that is against every single person of every country. No matter how powerful a leader could get, they could only be over locations, areas, and states, forcing them to entertain their narratives towards emotions, for example, and regarding the value of what is simultaneous as criminal and serious natures of positive treatments and of negative treatment, and of people in collusion, having people pretend passions and emotions. to each age of fact, treatment nature sickly distinctly. And if anyone tries other, they attach you to fake words, fake locations. There is a phenomenon there slash our phenomenon. I could show you, so you could all discern this the way I can. Because, for example, I could show you what is actually recorded leading up to a 2006 district court case in Connecticut that had former director. That was a case ongoing at the time of my father's death, too. No, Clay such that he was leading up to that, and in that 2006 district court case in Connecticut, with former director of the FBI as a defendant, Robert Luskin, former standing chairperson on Racketeering Influenced the Corrupt Organization Act, was a defendant. He had co-defendants with him, and his co-defendants and their family members and his lawyer were also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Also, where and how relevant, where they make interbranch family members and overt criminal enterprises and private ones. They have other people speak confessions for them, and they non-verbally confirm it. Where and how the databases, predicate acts, and wrongdoing roles are relevant also to and as roles with completely distinct and other additional natures of organized crime at locations and further intercampuses and further uses of the departments of the campuses at Central Connecticut State University, how individually grouped and together they have been involved with child campuses intercities, where and how our intelligence community has been effectively maintained, used remotely. That means interbranch, all exceptions, exception nature tied to them. And that means increasingly they have been kept needing to hide from natures. Actually, inherent active means actually inherent active and progressive means at all locations. And they're shown this through the projection method of the breaching method that keeps, big world, small world stuff, criminally foreign influence, keeps every identity of A through Z of difference with opinions / convictions regarding color, originally instilled, self-valued identities of integrity they can't defend themselves and afford, discern how the breaching method, awareness of how the breaching method forced that there, shows awareness also to uses of people's blaming, in other words, blaming other things on. If a little kid senses prejudice there, they are right as a little kid. And the adults are wrong not to blame it on the breaching method. And while they're, especially when they're not blaming on the breaching method, and they're pretending not to realize, and which is also on a mass scale employed through other motivations, natures, needs, interests too. Other subject treatments, simultaneous value treatments that are being and having been forbid at all formal locations sickly distinctly from how all other locations, like parks, like where people live, especially where they live and get shot near each other. So in other words, there's been offensive evidence reception racketeering since founding. There's been offensive identity reception racketeering since founding. And it's syntactically because of where and how the breaching method is relevant. It keeps manifest where if you try to forgive everyone, if you forgive everyone and just focus on the shared things, because we have to see this through each other. Everyone will have this manifest. It was shown to you. When people make treatments of what is black and white, or what slavery was about, they left out the breaching method, and that is evidence. See, then you come to realize this. Oh, I just heard our Anthony Wall told that. Well, let's hide what we said about American history. See, we want that too. We want the reactions to it. Them pretending to be treating emotions, honestly. Because emotions are functional by what is hyper simultaneous. So we could discern if people are lying or not. People are lying or not. I watched on television before, like crime scenes, and then like the guy's trying to interrogate, and then the guy breaks and he says, "Okay, well, yeah, maybe he shot him or something like that." Like I don't know where I saw that last. But for example, people need guys like that to interrogate them. But that guy's not really doing a good job with the crime scene. America is a hyper crime scene. Countries A through Z are hyper crime scenes. Juxtaposed with the crime scenes, the hyper crime scene method knew would be. It knew its method would cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Acts like predicate acts, natures like wrongdoers. Criminal incidence nature itself as a nature, where nature is value, value as nature, slash value as nature. As the increasing value of a sentence is positive or negative, and or neutral to what is relevant, individually grouped and together as subjects, share the identity relevant that way. So we have replaced the theory of relativity in the name of Albert Einstein is used to measure and maintain roles self-valued with or ignorant of the breaching method that is worse than obfuscating the identity of relativity. It's increasing relevance to all subjects' treatments, individually grouped and together as the identity the sciences share. And volume theory is also offensively a front with depends on the people who wrote it or whatever. The people making up different things with volume theory, all tactical ulterior from where and how. The identity of the hyper simultaneous and or the simultaneous as volume. As each of the words in the dictionary are distinct identities of volume. And identities have relativity to positive and to negative simultaneously. Relativity. See, the relativity is increasingly valued to our fact treatment nature quality slash IAS. So, as people have criminally foreign influenced fact treatment nature quality uses when they make opinions and convictions regarding uses of color originally and still, and regarding the value of how through that time everyone was blaming other things, others, themselves for the real causes of it. Even when where they were blaming it when they were telling on the truth, in other words, prejudice. But in other words, that prejudice that they have that this is if the reason the little kid could sense prejudice is because we have machines. We have an identity ground means and might to fix with that which is tactically worse than or forsaken, offensively tortured, identity theft, fraud, and slander styles in nature while simultaneously pretending other. And at the youngest grades, it's an imposition, sickly distinctly from how at the only, other at the other natures and ages and natures of campuses. We are in a semi-ancient trap, clear as day. So each must wrap to species train, species body moves when each one. Force is mandate here. our way, not theirs. We gang. So they were backed into logic the same way the killers of and gangs. The whole gangs are everyone's, that's life, man. Because those kids were victims of this sickly distinctly A campuses A through Z. It is coordinated too between different campuses, regardless if you switch towns and go to a whole bunch of different campuses. It has the short words at each age and nature measured, maintained through other juxtaposed motivations, natures, needs, interests than the breaching methods, but kept needing to hide the same finite, active, progressive lies and uses of the breaching method's identity as its own. Countries, modern nations, A through Z. No one had the integrity, the ability to speak for our country's right. So, oh, this cheers on. Well, thank you. I want to say, please, America, Connecticut, especially Weathersfield, you'll watch what they did. They coordinated. They coordinate. They force us to use each other's names. So that's why the interbranch switches and forging names because they had roles with it. But they had it with a whole bunch of other countries. But that's also self-valued by them as means to hide how they have the campuses involved with this, with the people that were, since they were kids, criminally foreign influenced, like people associated with the Joshua Stryker, who non-verbally confirmed roles on and off Trinity College with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, as roles with others who also confess, demonstrate, confirm predicate acts roles. Identity theft, fraud, slanders against me behind my back too, so I couldn't respond. And with girls that they abused when they were kids, forcing them to roles with evidences crimes and other natures of federal crimes with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and how they made individual groups and together the little boys and girls who dated each other and stuff like that, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders of other people when they have them, how they have them individually grouped and together, abused even sexually, by including how women rolls with it and how they have the locations rolls with it, and then how they have it through time, the victims as roles, forcing other people to be victims because it wasn't really about just the churches locations. It was all locations, campuses. They're putting fake things. These are little evidence rap mobs. The whole kids, if they were sexually abused or not, they were making up things for the guy, but also for people off those campus locations, keeping on those locations through other motivations, natures, needs, interests. So they have juxtaposed natures of distinct crimes and distinct natures of experts. They brought those crimes up. They brought those experts up. Then they pretend we're attacking them. So they have a guy named Ducey involved with CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, where they've been painting arrays because their sources have been giving them criminally foreign influenced information. People associated with the campuses they went to, everyone, and with locations next to it involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders through time, falsified uses of journalism licenses to further identity theft, fraud, slanders, illusions, and uses of them. It's not by accident at the last second they say, "Oh, we can't afford to do anything better." Well, they have, they're making sick decisions, having made sick decisions since founding, relative to the real cause of negative value needs, progressions, action natures, relative to the real cause of the uses of defenses of roles with that, defenses of factory means with that, factory nature quality with that. So, in other words, they have recorded conscious roles with the maintenance of group, quote, groupthink, unquote, but also groupthink further than anyone fathomed, where and how actually they kept and keep. So, in other words, the same people leading more FBI leading up to a 2006 district court case, in that case, and since have been recorded themselves involved also involved criminally with the former director of the FBI in his defendant capacities, also leading up to and in a Ninth Circuit Court case in the Ninth Circuit Court in Manhattan, right next to the World Trade Center, right in that context, leading up to that from years prior, in that context, and since people in criminally foreign influence a whole bunch of other countries in a whole bunch of different ways, and tied to a whole bunch of different instances that are all fact in nature too, oriented where they make confessions at once, and then they pretend to know people with those people at schools and stuff like that, and with complete strangers. These are also people with the transition from ARCA to RICO, the Organized Crime Control Act, to the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act, RICO. In other words, these are, and then the Patriot Act is recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed too. How they label the Patriot is involved with measuring and maintaining. How through our own, how our own, they use remotely how our own measure and maintain. Roles blaming on other things, others ourselves, where they had roles in the World Trade Center attack, and since with the investigators and military, our military had roles with that, as their roles with Afghanistan leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since, with people associated with this Joshua Stryker, with identity theft, fraud, slanders with them, involved with Los Solitos, and with Italian organized crime groups per them, and per the people, reporters involved with federal crimes with court judges through time. And with forensics locations that have all ties to the same house involved with predicate acts with them, identity thefts and frauds of people tied to them, like Joshua Julian, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, roles with federal crimes on my street, also on off a child abuser campuses, a child abuser principal's campus. Now there is also there are a whole bunch of other people in my town's police chief from 1 years ago involved with drugs and medicines, crimes with the kids, bombs, crimes with the kids, evidence crimes with the kids, sexual crimes with the kids, through them involved with fabricating things, crime methods where they have their own friends call up their police forms that also forge and switch names through time. Then they're always constantly increasingly need to hide more lies and more name stacking with people that we don't even know. We didn't have conversations with them. They painted themselves in corners. So Wethersfield Police and other departments, intercities involved with them, personally, criminally involved with the locations, planting evidences through time. Identity theft, frauds, instances, for example, too, that can only be viewed. In other words, they already painted themselves bringing things before courts and roles with depositions where there was consciously roles painting fake sides, arrays in collusion with identity thefts, frauds, instances that also go back as lie progression cover-ups, and needs for that enforced both by the breaching method and nature itself. So there are people that were in other classes that went to my grammar school that were spreading lies with federal criminals and with overt criminal enterprises with the areas through time. And they have roles with predicate acts with them on off the colleges and universities with people on my campus that made confessions tied to that. There's Alina's Pizza, and there are people associated with Lance Cuddy. I never had a conversation with my life. He's also involved with identity thefts and frauds against me with people from Alina's Pizza, with Officer Hunter and with other police forms and the lawyer of former people around the area of the lawyer, the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, in Hartford, Robert Chevrolet. So there's a John LeConche who has a daughter, Dawn LeConche. Never had communication with her on phone in my life. She's involved with people involved with wire crimes, identity theft, and frauds with Heather Hansen, and with people at Central Connecticut State University also involved with predicate acts on my street and houses near me through time. And this is where and how they force people to roles with wrongdoing and predicate acts where they don't want roles too. But in other words, this is them speaking So, and people that also they pretended I had conversations with, and they manipulated the sense and sensibilities of them, also relevant to where and how they have the sense and sensibilities of people at religious locations involved with the interbranch forging and switching names with child offenders, also at those religious locations, still preventing mandated law. And someone to get a name to counter. And they have this Facebook rolls with this. They've been leaving out exceptions in exception nature where they don't have the rights to not be sued as for uses of Facebook per other juxtaposed with it. In other words, they didn't have to do right to do this and then simultaneously still be pretending they have rights to use Facebook criminally. No, they have predicate acts roles in cases that were relied upon as methods roles that relied upon, and as a method roles that relied upon the police forms in collusion with the people pretending passions and emotions on people's Facebook page. They're involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and federal crimes in databases at campuses and at interbranch locations. And at all the exception nature tied to them, like medical databases, prison databases, military databases. Those are criminally foreign influenced. There's been people using where and how they replace that which is actually recorded and the voice of integrity and the value of that which is actually simultaneous at all locations, increasingly. Other standing, other needing to pretend. That's why when they make any kind of a positive negative treatment, that is inseparable from all kinds of subject treatments. The increasing value of where and how we're going to use as value, where and how the breaching method, put that there. For our legal counter, for our syntactical counter, we're also going to use the methods, whole predicate acts delivery system methods are involved with what is actually recorded as American history. It is more important to have our time. It's more important to have our time understand that and to understand how criminal insidiousness was propagated, to be self-cultivated, to explain, to force, trick, hurt, persuade, take it, shock, or all worse. Defenses of roles with that, simultaneously blaming other things, others, and or themselves, simultaneously locked, increasingly incapable of discerning what nature shows. Vaccines, power grows, all trained, species body. It moves the game. It changes everything. It all means. One way redeems. It's native pure since some ancient times. It just reminds we're in a trap. /S. So one/all must rap. I tell it best, vaccines. Thank you. Have a great night. Vaccines brings might.